Hi, I'm Dr. Charlie Kruger. Welcome to this free on-demand webcast brought to you by the UW-Stout Leadership Development Institute. The purpose of this webcast is to illustrate and briefly discuss some tools that can help you lead and facilitate change. Nowadays, change is a way of doing business, and there are some basic phases that people go through as they deal with change. From introducing the change to going into a period of denial, and then once the change is realized, resisting the change, exploring the change, in other words, learning how to adapt to the change, and finally being committed to the change. The two tools we will be discussing can help set the context for change, introduce the change, and help deal with some of the resistance to change. The first tool has a rather curious name. It's called the blob model. This is an excellent tool for helping people understand the context of the change and to help them identify what can be done to begin to facilitate change. Here, credit must be given to Harry Woodward and Mark Tager, as their blob model is outlined in their excellent book, Leadership in Times of Stress and Change. The concept of the blob model is to recognize the old way of doing things and the new changes as two separate blobs. Then the old is ever overlapped with the new. This overlap then gives us a conceptual view of the areas that remain the same, the areas of loss, and areas of gains. I like this model because it helps people understand what's not changing as well as what is changing, and people can be involved in delineating the areas of loss, areas of gain, and area of those things that will remain the same. People tend to be comfortable with this model, and once you have done the overlay, you can facilitate discussion. One of the steps to use this model is to develop three lists. One list about the things that will remain the same, one list about the things that will be lost, and a list about the things that will be gained. Once those lists are developed, you can begin to develop some plans of action around these concepts. First, build on what is not changing. This is the bedrock to move forward with. This list will be much longer than the others. Acknowledge the losses. Focus on what is real and what is not real. Support people as they go through their issues during the change process. And act on the gains. Distinguish between those that are troublesome and not worth dealing with and those that are opportunities. By the way, I would recommend that you have people develop the lists individually beforehand so that the blob session you facilitate will yield a good list of items. With these lists that you've developed, you can begin to develop a plan of action to help facilitate the change process. The second tool is more well known, the force field analysis, which came from some of the early work about change by Kurt Lewin. Essentially, the idea here is to identify the change, then brainstorm a list of driving forces that will help to make the change happen, and restraining forces that will prevent or stall out the change from occurring. One of the mistakes that can be made in using the force field analysis is to ignore the restraining forces and only focus on the driving forces, and try to leverage those to move the change process forward. This often results in the restraining forces increasing to compensate, thus resulting in the change stalling out. For example, one of the companies I worked with wanted employees to adopt a new process to improve productivity. They identified the reasons why people should accept the change, the driving forces, only to find people bringing more resistance to the change. Eventually, the leaders identified the major restrainers and involved some of the employees in determining how to reduce the major restrainers. This resulted in a breakthrough which moved the change process forward. So the keys to using the force field analysis are to develop a list of the driving forces and restraining forces affecting the change. Note that it is not just the opposites of a driving force that are a restraining force. In fact, it's a good idea to make two independent lists. First, to avoid this opposite thinking effect. Then identify the major drivers, restrainer or restrainers. These are usually represented by arrows. The greatest drivers and restrainers have the longest arrows. Next, determine how to reduce or remove the major restrainers. In our on-screen example, restraining item B and perhaps D would be the restrainers to work on. So the steps again are to identify the drivers and restrainers, determine the major restrainer or restrainers, reduce, remove, or eliminate the restrainers. The force field analysis is a great tool to help define the context of change and to deal with resistance. I often said that the willingness to explore resistance offers new insights and opportunities for solutions that often cannot be realized by focusing only on driving forces. To summarize, the force field analysis and the blob model will help you define the context of the change, introduce the change, and potentially provide action plans to move the change process forward. Involving key players in the development of these two models is essential. This is Charlie Kruger signing off. Thanks for viewing this webcast.